One of my favorite things about Webtoon is the fact that it's often people creating these. People that understand what we like in stories. It feels like people are creating stories, not corporations or companies or groups that just want our money, you know? Where we see a lot of this is in topics that aren't usually touched on. We get a lot of LGBTQ+ stuff, which is great. We also get a good amount of mental illness and trauma, which is good in a different way. It's a great thing to spread awareness on these things. But where else I think is great is the characters. Too often we're given heroic characters. Characters that feel a little too perfect. Characters that feel a little too noble or secure, maybe a little too innocent or optimistic. And don't get me wrong, these characters can be great, but we see them so much that it becomes a little dull when they appear. These characters teach us to be better than we are or whatever, but I think they're constantly used because they're safe. It's hard to hate a character that's noble, heroic, self-sacrificing. And if you like the main character, then you'll want to continue reading. Even if you don't hate the character, then you're off to a good start. Which is probably your first thoughts. However, we see a lot of love given to people that are a little less than perfect. How often do villains steal the show? Like Loki, not even a character we love to hate, just a character we, or at least I, love. Even if he's done a lot of terrible things. Which brings us to our topic for today. It's definitely a topic I've danced around before, especially when talking about some of my favorite characters, like John from Unordinary, Ethan from Hardcore Leveling Warrior, or you, or Coach K, just about every character from the Boxer. The idea of morally gray characters. Which brings us to important questions. Why do we love these characters, and how do you create one? Let's tackle the harder one first. How do you create a well-loved morally gray character? As a study, we're going to use the 3 characters I mentioned before. And while we go through these characters, and if you're making any at home, remember the acronym RUT, because it's going to be a helpful way to create some characters. Let's start with just about every character in the Boxer. That might be too many characters. Since I already talked about Coach K last week, go check that out if you haven't, let's touch on the people I hated the most when they were introduced, the Santorino Brothers. To make a long story short, the Boxer excels at creating interesting, engaging, and lovable side characters, breathing life into them. I'll be honest, there isn't a hated character. I thought the Santorino Brothers were going to be the exception to this rule. That we were going to get truly terrible people. People that we easily would hate, people we can't wait to see get demolished by you. Unlike most of the other characters that we kind of low-key root for, even if we know they're not gonna win. The Santorino Brothers were presented as terrible, awful people. People who didn't mind actually threatening someone's life. Bringing an actual gun into the ring, using steroids, paying off the ring ref, and stay with me on this one. Convincing the daughter of someone they're gonna fight soon that he's not actually bad and agree to date each other, despite her father's protest, all eventually to dump her and likely mentally manipulate her father in order to get him so furious that he's not thinking straight during the fight and in the ring so the battle is an easy victory in favor of them. Jesus, what? It would have been so easy to just hate them. If we only got that side to them. Morally gray would be a terrible way to describe these characters. Then we got their backstory. And man, oh man, does it hurt. Marco and Frabizio Santorino were brothers, and Maria Santorino being their mom, and Julia being their sister. The Santorino family was a family in poverty. Maria was born with a low IQ and had to use other methods of providing housing and food and such for her family. Meanwhile, Marco and Frabizio tried their best to support their family on the down low, stealing from tourists and brutally beating up people even when they were children. These guys had to fight and claw to survive. Even when they learned boxing from this guy, an old drunken man, they were still fighting a lot. Eventually, they basically became mobsters and boxers. focusing on taking care of their family first, which also included their drunken master, in a beautiful Christmas chapter that makes me legitimately cry. They're finally happy here. Sure, they're terrible people, they're basically criminals. But they're finally happy here. They're finally living without worry or stress, their family is healthy, they're eating every day, they have a stable roof over their house, they don't need to worry about money or anything. They're finally living their lives until their master dies in front of them. He encourages them to fight on, moving on from the criminal underworld because he knows how dangerous and deadly that could be. To fight and become champions even if they couldn't, to try their hardest to win. This brings out the T in Rut, which stands for tragic. These characters show us the horrible lives they lived before, the struggle to stay alive. When a character has a tragic story, the horrible things they've done lessens. Sure, it's no excuse, but it's what changes the Santorino Brothers from truly terrible and awful people into people who've suffered, people who've been hurt in the past, people who barely lived to see the light of day, turned them into people. Let's move on to our R, and to my favorite Webtoon series, Hardcore Leveling Warrior. It's been a hot minute since I last talked about Hardcore Leveling Warrior, but this series probably has my favorite character in the form of Ethan. Ethan is a great character because of how terrible he is. In the world of Hardcore Leveling Warrior, we follow Ethan, the titular Hardcore Leveling Warrior. How many times are we going to say this? In the world of Lucid Adventure, an MMORPG that you can play while you sleep. At the start of this series, Ethan is the #1 ranked player in the entire game, and the story is about how he loses that rank and tries to climb his way back to the top. Granted, while Season 2 has taken a turn, the first season was about that. Now onto my favorite part, Ethan's #1 rank. How did Ethan achieve such power and strength? Through questing in noble means? Of course not! Ethan had to play dirty to get to the top. Ethan's power and skills came from the fact that he basically cheated and stole everyone's powers, taking them from other players, gaining exclusive abilities, items, and stats that he could never have gotten through normal means. And that makes a lot of sense. The best player in the world isn't going to be the most noble, or the most heroic, or the person who does the right thing every time. It's going to be the one who fights smart, the one who can outsmart his opponent no matter how strong. The reason Ethan's character works so well is because it's our next characteristic, R. Realistic. Granted, a video game you play while you sleep that can somehow leak into the real world and vice versa isn't super realistic. But I'm talking about the character, Ethan. Ethan is someone who thrives on being smarter than his opponents. Of course that person is going to be a little arrogant. Of course he's going to be a little cocky because he's earned his spot at the top. He has justified his attitude and his arrogance because he's someone who can actually back it up. Even when he's at the bottom, he still outskills and outsmarts his opponents. Even when he doesn't have the stats to back it up, he's still proving that he's better than everyone else. And not to mention, he's just fun, man. His smile, his attitude, his fight scenes, and his thought process is such a breath of fresh air from normal, dull, heroic people. But that brings us to our last character, the much-loved John Doe from Unordinary, which brings us to our last characteristic, you. Do I need to describe John from Unordinary? He practically dominates not only Wellston, but my channel as well. Anyways, the world of Unordinary is a world where just about everyone has superpowered abilities called, well, abilities. Our story follows John, someone who's lived his life as a crippled, someone who doesn't have abilities. And the other students really like reminding him of his lack of power. Through force, often. As the school and the world is led by the strong. But that's just it. John does have powers. An incredibly powerful ability known as aura manipulation. The ability to mirror and amplify other people's abilities. Man, how many times have I said that? The reason that John doesn't do it is because of his past. When John discovered his powers, he kind of went insane. When he was younger, John was bullied for being powerless. So when he became powerful, he wanted to show everyone else the same punishment that they gave him. Until his best friends tried talking him out of it, and while they failed, one of them decided to rally everyone against John to try to get through to him. And while they also technically failed, they got John suspended, putting him through awful, truly awful, basically torture, until he conformed with the status quo. John was branded as a monster in his mind, so he tried his hardest to avoid that again. So when he went back to Wellston, he became what he was before a monster, a crippled, hoping that he could live a peaceful life. But unfortunately, people wanted to bring the monster back out of him. Understandable. John wanted to live a peaceful and happy life. He didn't want to flex on his classmates, he didn't want to boast, he just wanted peace. He lived his life as a crippled for years, suffering beatdowns and bullies. So when he decided to quote-unquote unleash the beast, it was understandable. Even ignoring the years of pain and suffering he received, take a look at the moment he decides to revert back. When someone he thought he was becoming friends with dragged him out to the middle of nowhere, ambushed him with 2 other students, forcing him onto the ground, bloodied and broken, and then and only then was when John slipped back into the role of a monster. Of course he would. It's understandable that now he'll fight back. Now he'll show the school the pain and suffering they've caused him. Ruts. Realistic, understandable, tragic. But that brings us to why we like these characters so much. And why don't more people try to make characters like these? John, the Santorino Brothers, Ethan are all complex and well developed. They all require finesse. It's a balancing act. Characters like these require care and attention that can be difficult to pull off, and it's definitely a risk to create characters like these. That's also why we love them so much. Characters like these show that the world isn't black and white, but shades of gray. That people aren't wholly good or wholly bad. Characters, much like people, have layers to them. That they're complex, that they're developed. That people don't fit into one role of good or bad. That people are just that. People. But that's all for today. So if you think I missed a characteristic, go ahead and leave it in the comments below. I want to make a really, really long acronym, because I think that'd be funny. But like always, thank you for watching, and I hope I'll see you next week. Take care.